Good evening, everybody. Scott Stevens here on another perspective, and I'll tell you everything that's going on behind the scenes because this thing did not want to happen. Lots and lots of strange resistance in odd places. So we'll see how it goes. We'll honestly see how this baby flies. Coming to you on YouTube and Facebook. And then we'll parse out some projects or parts of this to drop on over onto some of the other platforms. Good to see you in there, Vicky. This is kind of an interesting topic. In some ways, it's a little bit dicey to go to because so much of it, from top to bottom, I don't want to say is hearsay, but is secondhand. We're not getting this from the horse's mouth just yet. We are seeing little bits of what people have participated in these backdoor meetings. There was one guy, and I don't remember his name, but I should, who was the leader of Facebook. And he had gone into a Bilderberg group about 2 years ago. And when they broke for lunch or broke for the day, I don't recall which it was, he stormed out of there and was PO'd. PO'd. So to the point where he came across information, it was shared with him. And in the cults, in these societies, to speak of things is death. So he agreed to that, was informed of the plans, of the progresses, but then could not do anything about it but play his role because he accepted a part of it. So it becomes a rather challenging situation for those folks who know, whether just, somebody lets go and they talk to him about it, and then, they don't know what to do with that information. It becomes a bit of a challenge. And we're in that same way, where we've got to figure out how to negotiate what remains unseen. Though, with a periscope, a pair of binoculars, maybe a drone on high, you can see that something is coming over the curvature of the earth, coming over the horizon towards us. And we wonder exactly what we can do. Because as we prepare for storms, you prepare for a snowstorm differently than you would prepare for an earthquake. And earthquakes tend to come upon an area, a region, suddenly. So snowstorms we can see and prepare for. Those are easy. Milk and bread get evacuated out of the store. The shelves are empty because everybody knows it's coming. An earthquake is an entirely different beast. You can bring stuff back from the store, but will your house even have a foundation, a roof, utilities? Those kind of things are very, very different when you're talking about preparation. Good evening, Jane. Good evening, Robin and Vicky. Good to see you on there. So every artisan has a favorite set of tools at their disposal for the required job. This is what I'm talking about. What is the job that we will be confronted with? What job lies ahead, and what tools will serve one best when navigating the great reset that we are beginning to hear is not that far ahead? Here's the contact information. In fact, there's another one in there. I have dogs sneezing. It's amazing what you try to do here right in the middle of dinner hour when you got people outside working on cars and you're going to pull the show off in here. All right. Where did I see this graphic? And basically an aptly titled in front of the US dollar called the end game. Once the powers that can wiggle themselves out of responsibility for the dollar, then all of those obligations attached to the dollar are let go of. All of those debt obligations, and this may be one of the upsides, and we'll visit a slide where we talk about a debt jubilee, where the dollar has its end, but then so does in some ways American or the sovereignty of these United States. And that is the goal, is to bring all of these separate nations, all of these separate peoples together inside a brotherhood. So what lies ahead? So many questions to answer, and all any of us can do is try to assemble a partial picture of what may go down from the bits and pieces that have been shared publicly. The other wild card is the divine. What randomness or unanticipated chaos might be introduced to affect a more positive outcome for humanity? And this is the time that all of us that would be watching us, and certainly all of us that have been born in this day and age, have been waiting for. It's crazy how we all know inside of us at a deepest level possible that I'm supposed to be here now, that I'm anticipating, looking up to, or looking forward to some kind of big global event and participating to the best of our abilities, but also at the same time that each of us brings a specific role, set of skills and talents to that which lies ahead. All right, coming from this reset, it appeared to be that we would have it driven by climate. There was even rumors and talks about shutting down the economy because of the climate, of the pollution, of all of those environmental ramifications that are underway, have happened and have happened for generations because of how we use energy. Energy was going to be the fall guy. But apparently tackling climate change seemed expensive. And then COVID happened. So it's all beginning to make sense now, isn't it? Despite the recycling, the energy-saving insulation of the high mile per gallon vehicles, ride-sharing HOV lanes, it still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, and it was perceived that the plug had to be pulled on all of it. We didn't all bite on that climate apple. We didn't bite the tree of knowledge, and so we had been served up a virus. No, so this is a continuation of that Salon article, and that was the question behind a new paper published last week in the journal Science. And according to the analysis, the money countries have put on the table to address COVID-19, with the money that they've put on far outstrips the low-carbon investments that scientists said were needed in the next 5 years to avoid a climate catastrophe by an order of magnitude. So what this comes down to is that it's cheaper to write checks via modern monetary theory, MMT, than it would be to go through and rejigger an entire new green economy. That we can pull the plug on this one, and then we'll achieve those CO2, those climate goals in this transition. They stress the need for governments to provide a transition support for workers in these most polluting sectors. If you want to support people and businesses to reschool themselves, to redirect themselves, he said, echoing the principle of that it is just a transition. An assistant professor, Mark Paul, of economics and environmental studies at the College of Florida, New College of Florida, mind you, said the study helped illustrate the economic feasibility of climate action, but criticized the comparison between a one-time stimulus injection and the sustained investment needed for the energy transition. It's comparing apples to oranges, he said. Extraordinary COVID-19 stimulus spending has been necessary, but exceptional, a one-time shot, as he put it. A holistic climate response would have addressed all sectors of the economy, not just energy, and then normalize a much greater annual expenditure of up to 5% of the global gross domestic product each year for at least the next 10 years, he explained. Ideally, Paul said these injections would recur automatically each year until the economy was fully decarbonized and the unemployment rate was back again below 3.5%. This proposal he and several other climate experts had made in March back to the Congress. Now, if we take one measure, and it is this topic which garners so much attention as we look at Congress, as we look at the media, and that is the Arctic and the sea ice. And if we can look at 2003, this was the minimum at what point the sea ice achieved. This is the extent of times 10 to the sixth kilometers squared, so square kilometers, so about a million, essentially a million square kilometers. So we can see it not every year, but the progression has definitely been down. The only year lower than 2020 was back in 2012, and then we had some building back up into 2013, 2014, and then we began to 15 and kind of melt back off. So we had a little bit of a cool down as we went through the last lower part of the previous solar minimum, but 2020 has certainly been low. And this year, we have built that ice back at a slower pace. And this was only back to about the 23rd of October is the end date on this particular chart. So we are at the lowest ever. So what we're recognizing is the sea ice is melting back slower. And that is kind of their headline. There are other studies out there, and we've shared with you in previous broadcasts, that once the sea ice is gone, when it's gone, then all of that fresh water will begin to drain down through Newfoundland and Greenland. And that will shut down that North Atlantic thermocline and begin a whole other series of cascading effects. And indeed, when we look back in time through sea sediments and oxygen isotopes, this has happened. That is the exclamation on top of the temperature spikes, and then there's always a fat drop back. So one way or another, climate will remedy itself, or we jump on board and begin to assist what will ultimately be the cool down. So Time Magazine last week, we had this as well, talking about the Great Reset. And then The Economist just today, basically on the cover, that came out, Halloween, over the weekend, why it has to be Joe Biden. Otherwise, the flag ends. And it's interesting because they can blame the failure of the empire, of the nation, on two things. Either it's Trump or it's climate and debt. Either way, it fits the agenda. And ultimately, Barron's just yesterday saying the winner, doesn't matter who wins the election, it is Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has the stabilizing force for the economy and the market. It's interesting that they took this point of view with Jerome Powell because I believe there's a Barron's article just yesterday stating that it was Congress that mattered with the markets. And maybe this is more the long-term view, and I could give them that. But it was Congress and stimulus, no stimulus, stimulus, no stimulus that was driving the ups and downs, almost the hourly ticks of the market. So as we come to a reset, I have to ask, what don't they have that they want? What do we still have that they don't want us to have? And what does an unnecessary lockdown, and maybe it is necessary, depending on, I can say this and it would be a little bit of a smart-ass joke. It depends on if you're a Karen or not. Interesting today, the most named, the females, as they vote for the two presidential candidates. Nancy's voted for Trump, whereas Karen's, literally the most popular name voting for Biden, was Karen. It's just funny how the universe works. So back to, what does unnecessary lockdown accomplish? And I kind of anticipated that we were going to get some of these answers, not necessarily immediately, but as we kind of listened in and had maybe defectors come out of Davos, or maybe it would just be a press release saying this is what's going to happen, this is how we're going to accomplish this reset. But the meeting was rescheduled, much like our town's Halloween party last night. It was canceled because we care. So during the week of 25th of January, the forum will digitally convene high-level Davos dialogues where key global leaders will share their views. So I kind of think the policy discussions, unless maybe it just simply will not be safe for them to convene, to travel, as we're in the midst of another lockdown, even though, as a rule, they tend to lock down, they tend to travel privately, so that's not a problem. I had to throw this in there. This came up on Discord in one of the groups that I follow. So I find that when I rant and caution about privacy, about how truly little we have of it left, I'm often perceived like one of those wild-eyed, wild-haired doomsday preachers, people who, the people avoid on the sidewalk, and a vast chunk of the populace couldn't care less. Surely, and this is an interesting username, deleted user, #000, surely you've forgotten that the vast majority of people are not in control of their minds and readily just take the download from the media, schools, and experts. Remember, the word government is from two Latin words, gubernance, or gubernare, control, and mentis, the mind. It takes strength and courage to see through the tyranny of the matrix of deception. Interesting, and I'm curious, and a curious mind that questions why things are the way they are. And that's the big thing, the questioning mind. And this, my friends, is what I think they do not want us to possess long term, is that questioning mind. Have you seen that 8th grader test from, 1910? It was a hard test. We, 100 years ago, were far smarter than we are now. And I'm not saying smart as the ability to recite facts, but I'm saying smart as in the ability to negotiate circumstances presented, to negotiate obstacles, to solve problems, to reason out, to see other solutions. That is intelligence in my eyes, not a recitation of 2 + 2 = 4. And even now, all of a sudden, math, grammar, and the ability to get a good score is racist. So we've got this whole convoluted cognitive dissonance that has been accepted and pushed upon us as normal. We can't excel. Otherwise, we are condemned. All right, so this one's interesting. The Chinese military, it knows and is willing to speak openly about human-made superweapons used to damage the earth. Meanwhile, Western governments continue to claim this is a conspiracy nearly 20 years on. And there's some other parts to this that I did not share. I want to vet them a little more. It's some fantastic video of floating radar platforms. And these floating radar platforms are very Tesla-esque, meaning they have abilities that would make a lot of our weapons obsolete. Absolutely, and trillions of dollars spent in hardware that is obsolete. All right, other tactics mentioned. Psychological war, spreading rumors to intimidate the enemy and break down their will. We see that with leaflets over battlefields. Smuggling wars, throwing markets into confusion and attacking economic order. How do you oversupply a market, or how do you undercut a legal supplier? A media war, manipulating what people see and hear in order to lead public opinion along towards your own agenda. Drug war, obtaining sudden and huge illicit profits by spreading disaster in other countries. Why are we still in Afghanistan? Network war, venturing out in secret and concealing one's identity in a type of warfare that is virtually impossible to guard against. Technological war, creating monopolies by setting standards independently. Are we talking Betamax versus VHS? Different kinds of CD formats before one was settled on, and who wins that standards, that technological war? Fabrication war, presenting a counterfeit appearance of real strength before the eyes of enemies. And I could see other applications of fabrication war. Resource war, grabbing riches by plundering stores of warehouses. Economic aid war, bestowing favor in the open and contriving control matters in secret. Cultural war, leading cultural trends along in order to assimilate those with different points of view. This is big time underway, especially in the European countries. International law war. Have you heard of lawfare? Where you do and wage battle through lawyers, seizing the earliest opportunity to set up regulations. Governments are really, really good at that. How we lost true free communication when the FCC was established. How we nearly lost the internet. The U.S. gave it away 10 years ago. Gave away the naming convention. We gave it away, and now it sits in international hands. Why would a reset be required if these types of covert actions have been used since the beginning of, go ahead, fill in the blank, beginning of when? What couldn't these types of covert actions accomplish that a reset might accomplish? Let's think about that. China's contributing and benefiting from America's chaos, as their size of their economy now arguably larger than America's. I saw numbers where the Chinese GDP is upwards of $4 to $5 trillion larger than ours. Ours being estimated 23, 24 trillion pre-COVID, mind you, and theirs bumping out 27, 28 trillion. That honestly makes them the largest economy in the world. And in many ways, then that would change their status in the World Trade Organization from a developing nation to one that should sit at the big boys table and lose a lot of those privileges, a lot of those backdoor deals, a lot of those here you go until you grow up kind of thing. You can take the bib off, now you're a big boy. So, as an American, watch nearly every aspect of the tactics listed in the above unrestricted warfare. That book, they're taking shape before your eyes and has that potential war with China already quietly started without the shooting. Writing for the New York Post on October 24, 2020, Michael Goldwyn, communist columnist Michael Goldwyn listed his reasons for voting for Trump again. He included, the other side must not be rewarded for its efforts to sabotage and remove a duly elected president. Russia was a scam that ruined lives and put a cloud over the White House for 3 years. The sequel was partisan impeachment, a clumsy coup attempt orchestrated by Pelosi and Trump haters in Congress, the deep state, and the media. The press corps bias of 16 had morphed into full-blown partisanship on a daily basis in print, digital broadcast outlets. And now we're to the point where Facebook and Twitter and other platforms openly use their power to censor pro-Trump news and opinion while promoting anything that makes the president look bad. And as we talked about, I think it was Monday last week, it's not the algorithms, it's the people behind them. We have become subject to algorithms. These algorithms you and I personally sculpt by the like button. The like button then goes back into the algorithm, and in order to keep you engaged with that platform for the longest period of time, it will continue to feed you not unbiased information, but information you will gladly consume, truthful or not truthful. All right, Google Play bans third-party app for YouTube alternative BitChute. FYI, every one of these shows is available on that platform. From here on out, every one of my shows will be available on that platform. Just look for it. So alt tech is increasingly being blocked from the Google-controlled Android App Store. So it's they can keep you from being in the big boys, but even now they're trying to and have tried to keep those discussions as minimal as possible that would counter the primary narrative. Afghan poppies, yes, you got it. If you can't get the money from Congress, we have to find another means of trafficking with high profit items. That's it. Russia couldn't hold it, and we couldn't hold it before that. So there's something highly valuable about that train outside of the point that the mineral content of Afghanistan alone is worth $2 to $3 trillion. But haven't we nearly spent that much in the last 20 years being all bellicose, or being over there and being the man? So it's kind of crazy. All right, let's go back to the Fed, because that institution either has to stand behind the reset and participate in it, or be swept away. It's put itself in a corner in how, in combination with Congress, in combination with trying to be all things to all people, that, and I guess the other part of it is, if you don't have to pay the debt and it's left to the next generation, it's a lot easier to spend. So in an economy that requires $5 of debt to create $1 of economic growth, changes to interest rates have an immediate impact on consumption of growth. What this goes to, and you can read through it here, you can pause the show and read through them, is about rising interest rates. What is the true value of money? And as money begins to slow, almost coming to a stop, as it does when you go through a lockdown, what value money used to have isn't held across the change in velocity. Where I think the money velocity peaked in either 89 or 79, right back in then. It has been slowly on a descent since then. And it's interesting that almost mirrors very, very closely interest rates. The higher the interest rate, the faster the money moves through the system to do the work for the spender. So what we're seeing is the Fed Reserve is not in a position to where it can raise interest rates. It would simply bankrupt the system. So we're at the point where potential debtors become more conservative and borrow less, if not or not at all. Investors become more conservative. They commit. Producers become more conservative and reduce expansion plans. Consumers become more conservative and save more and spend less. I'm guilty. These behaviors reduce the velocity of money, which puts downward pressure on prices. Money velocity has already been slowing for years, a classic warning sign that deflation is impending. And the only way a Ponzi scheme works is if we have inflation. With new money coming in, new debt coming in, new borrowers taking on the liability of having to commit new work into servicing that debt. If you don't get people showing up to buy cars, homes, stocks even at this price, then the whole system slowly becomes it comes apart at the seams. So clearly, deflation is impending. Now, thanks to virus-related lockdowns, money velocity has begun to collapse. As widespread pessimism takes hold, expect it to fall even further. And the summary is simply the Federal Reserve has no real options unless they're willing to allow the system to reset painfully. Unfortunately, given how we have a decade of experience of watching monetary experiments only succeed in creating a massive wealth gap, maybe we should consider an alternative. Ultimately, the Fed administration will have to face hard choices to extricate the economy from the current liquidity trap. However, history shows that political leadership never makes the hard choices until those choices are forced upon them. You must be ahead of this event. While we continue to hope we can grow our way out of our debt problem, hope has never been a functional strategy. You think? So, how can one protect one's income or even build something new inside of a contracting economy? And we come back to potential debtors become more conservative, investors more conservative. If you're in a contracting economy, how can you guarantee, or even with a little bit of certainty, that there will be a consumer there for your manufacturing plant, for your mail order business? How will you know? Along with pending currency reset, debt contagion, or even a potential jubilee, the economy is and will shrink until the resolution of COVID is presented. I sense that the preservation of what one has right now is the most paramount course of action, and attempting to build on shifting sands rarely ends well. Think about that. The shifting sands. Now, this paragraph comes from an interesting character who is within the Roman Catholic Church, and writing the president, basically saying, I kind of know what's coming, and do your best to keep this thing from becoming reality. The purpose of the Great Reset, he writes, is the imposition of a health dictatorship, aiming at the imposition of liberticidal measures, hidden behind tempting promises of ensuring a universal income and canceling individual debt. Your house is free. Your credit cards are paid off. Your car is free. And for most people, that'll be enough for them to say yes. Incredibly short-sighted, but enough for them to say yes. The price of these concessions from the International Monetary Fund will be the renunciation of private property and adherence to a program of vaccination against COVID-19, and he drops COVID-21, promoted by Bill Gates with the collaboration of the main pharmaceutical groups. Beyond the enormous economic interests that motivate the promoters of the Great Reset, the imposition of the vaccination will be accompanied by the requirement of a health passport and digital ID. I asked earlier, what do we have, or what don't we have, that they want us to have, or they would like to take away from us? And I think this is the answer. Will be accompanied by the requirement of a health passport and a digital ID, with a consequent contact tracing of the population of the entire world. Those who do not accept these measures will be confined in detention camps or placed under house arrest, and all of their assets will be confiscated. There was an MP, a Minister of Parliament in Canada, asking on the floor in Ontario, asking, why are we building all of these centers? What's the purpose? Tell us. We have to fund this. We have to go back to our constituents and give reasons why. Why? He asked the question twice, and then his microphone was cut. So this part of it is never discussed. And I think we're going to have a revelation. We talked about it in a couple of other shows, The Greatest Secret and the first part of the reset last week. Are you ready for stage 2? Because we are. There's a whole nother part. So, and as this information begins to get out, there will be great attempts to stop it, to stop discovery, to stop us from understanding what has been built up around us technologically, physically, legally, and through all kinds of other means, probably surveillance being the biggest one. Just wait till it is exposed that Microsoft Bill, meaning Bill Gates, has a dead man switch for his Windows OS. Every computer on Windows worldwide, a single line of code, all down. The sad thing is that people don't believe that something like this can be done. They don't understand just how chatty Windows is behind the scenes. It's interesting, even a phone. You go into airplane mode and it's largely silent. But as soon as you open it back up and say, hey world, I'm here, it communicates all that has happened in the time that it was silent. It brings the master up to date. So we had Sweden reporting 2,354 new coronavirus cases, by far the largest one-day increase on record, with 7 new deaths. Were they flu deaths or were they COVID deaths? It's not differentiated. So we begin to see what's happening with the larger picture around us. Political repression, absolute control over the economy, and more so. Look what happened in Michigan today. You cannot go to a restaurant, I don't know when the day starts, but it isn't too far in the future, to where you won't have to put down your name, address, phone number, names, and names of all of those people that join your party at a restaurant. These restaurants are now forced to name every single customer, time they arrived, time they left. Do they really have the authority to do that? Or will just having an app on the phone be enough that as you walk through their doorway, their gate, some NFC chip, near field communications chips, says, hey, he's here, checks you in? You got to ask. Mass surveillance, limited freedom of movement, control of education, control of entertainment, control of science, mass propaganda from the media. Where are we? So we're at election day tomorrow. If Biden loses, it's going to be an effing bloodbath. There's no other way to put it. Heads will roll. It's going to be ugly. I think we all have been prepared for that. I have neighbors whose sons-in-law left Portland just because of this. And as when you begin to see the massive crowds that the red team has, this might be exactly what happens. If Biden loses, doesn't matter how many ballots either side plays with. If one side is going to lose, it's a binary outcome. It's my gut feeling that tonight may be the last truly peaceful night that this nation has for some time to come. Maybe even for many months to come. Mark my words. This is what's happening around the streets. It doesn't matter what city you're in. There's a great booming business. If you need to start a business, do a business of reinforced windows and doors. It's booming. You will not be able to keep up with the demand. Plywood. About plywood, just because it seemed like the smart thing to do. Back in February, its prices tripled from $18 a sheet to nearly $50 a 4x8 sheet. Half inch, mind you. Plywood is needed. So we're going to see Antifa on one side, the Proud Boys on another, the rise of the black flags. And this is how they identify one another. It's the color black. So they're out there recruiting $1,500 a week. And when you have arguably 40% of the population at a minimum, or 28% unemployed, looking and paying at this rate, and if you're politicized, radicalized, why wouldn't you show up a day, 2 days, 3 days? This pays better than unemployment did, especially at that extra $600 a week. This is almost 3 times that. It's a good rate, even for winter. So this other guy, nevertheless, we're here 7 days in November, and beginning Tuesday, the effort by the deep state Democrats, sadly, members of the military and elements of the Chinese Communist Party, because they have invested, so heavily invested in an outcome in this country. Heavily invested in an outcome in this country. And this is what it goes like. Disinformation artists weaponizing bias and fears for the greater good. So does this declaration mean that nothing this person or organization represents, declares, does it have any truth? Do what they say, is it just to radicalize? Is it to trigger? Or is it to make you think? This is something we're going to have to be really, really careful about as we move slowly through the days ahead. So as we approach the night before election eve, protect your data. All of it. If a virus gets in the system, again, China had a big investment in this country. They allowed so much to happen, and the rug has been pulled out from that, and they're not going to let that go. They're not going to just let that pass without some kind of payback. That's not their way. Protect your data in case you cannot get to it. All of it. Hard copies and cloud copies and on your own computer copies. All of it. Restock your pantry to the best of your ability. Hold some cash. Absolutely hold some cash. Even if you think the dollar is going to fail, in the meantime, before that happens, have some cash. $200, $250. It may be too much for some people, but have some cash. Just in case the communications infrastructure has interruptions. You don't want to be at the pump and then it's out. You have some cash. Know your neighbors, and this is more of a long-term thing. Know them well enough for the ones you trust so that you can work together. If we are looking at civil unrest, there may be a time when that rolls through your neighborhood, and you need to know your neighbors so that you can be on the same page. It's a must. Spare batteries, solar chargers, something like a 30-watt charger, they're $40, $50. These are things you probably purchased back in February or March. Maybe not. Maybe now's the time. Large portable battery cells, extra blankets, and extra heaters. Because if communications goes down, power will probably be right behind it. And if we end up with civil unrest, the mentality, the energy is not constructive, but destructive. And when people are in the throes of those passions, who's to say what gets cut and what doesn't? It's unpredictable. And keep your vehicle full of gas, just in case. And you're going to need a whole lot of patience, understanding, and serenity when dealing with others. Even within your own family, you can see where there are divisions. It's been that way, not just today, not just tomorrow, not just next week, but for the past weeks, maybe months, and maybe it's been a couple of years now. And ultimately discernment. And that can only be utilized in the moment. And that usually only is available with wisdom. And that's the wisdom of some age, of some time. That's going to be the tough one. Have the chickens finally come home to roost in America? I can hear the roosters crowing. Something's coming, and we're to that point. It's almost been promised. It's been promised that one way or another, somebody's going to have a bad night tomorrow, and we'll try to stretch it out. Someone's going to have a bad night, and we need to be able to deal with that temper tantrum. All right, so some other shows we have here on Metadime. Vicky, she's over there in the comments. You see her right there, second for the bottom. That's right. Her coffee break show, 11 o'clock Mountain Time. And Tracy Wilson from Australia has her Unlocked show where we give you some business tricks and tips and how to get that business that you may need off the ground. We're to that point where the big job, we're already seeing a lot of office space. I think San Francisco office space occupancy is upwards of 17%. Hasn't been that high in every bit of 2 decades, and it's climbing as the people flee the city. With or without jobs, they're just getting out. They're bugging out. And so her show, same time as mine, just on alternating days. And then, of course, there I am. So we're kind of in a curious position. I'm honestly a little concerned for tomorrow night. We have to live with each other. We really do. We have neighbors. We have to live next to each other. We have been able to get along for nearly 250 years. And yeah, we had a civil war, and it was a bloody mess. One party seceded from the nation, and it took a 4 or 5 year battle for that to come back together. I would hate to see that happen once again, though there are prophecies that this nation does split into 2, 3, 4 parts. If that's what's coming, then that's what's coming. We'll get through it, most of us, but we'll get through it. And some part of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the flag will survive. It's an ideal, it's a concept, and I believe it is inspired. And so that part that inspired the founding fathers 200 plus years ago still exists to this day. And as it still exists, and I believe is eternal, can inspire once again. And to inspire once again, we just need to be receptive to the goodwill in man. All right, that's us for tonight. Thanks for coming on in there. Still see you on there. That's a nice little crowd to have you in here. I'm going to throw up a video. It's something I recorded the other night. I don't know if I'll have video with it, but it's definitely an audio track. Just talking about, where we are. That I absolutely know that there will be an intervention of some kind from, I guess the kindest way to put it would be on high, and that this needs to happen so we can see who each of us truly is in comparison to a truth that can be shown to us. And once you're shown that beautiful truth, then you can look at yourself and go, oh, I've missed the mark. Here. Yeah, and even here. And once you see that comparison, then that kind of brings us back to center. It brings us back to the meaning of life and to why we're here and to why we're dealing with these convulsions. We react, or we're a cause. We're a cause for the betterment, or we're reacting to what someone else has said, and we're having that turmoil in here, and we can't help but act out because we honestly don't know any effing better. We act out. And when you watch TV and movies and all they do is act out in anger, somebody has a bad day and they, sweep their hand across the desk and everything goes flying. It's ridiculous. That's not how we behave. We're bigger and better than that. Yeah, there's a natural resonance, and that's just, there's a couple of ways to look at that. There's a principle there. There is a pure resonance that exists. A pure resonance that exists, but it is buried so deep within us. And that's what I know will be shown each and every one of us, is the purity of that resonance. And ultimately, each one of us is asked to model, emulate, and behave like that pure resonance. Model drama. Yeah, there's a word for it, isn't there? And it apparently sells videos. All right, guys, have a great night. Good to see you in here. Thanks for participating and throwing your comments in there. I'll be here on Wednesday. Yeah, we'll see what happens between now and then. If you voted, good for you. I did too. All right, I'll catch you on Wednesday, tomorrow evening, 5 o'clock for some weather, but 6 o'clock Mountain on Wednesday for another perspective. And we'll kind of wrap things up and see where things are as we continue down this road and looking at tools we're all going to need as the Great Reset unfolds. Have a great night. And in the meantime, keep looking up.